Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome to Outta My League. I'm Nick Diaz. Do you want me to say it? As I told y'all, you need to chill out. Not everything is as it seems, especially when it comes to name, image, and likeness. So, LSU is on a really big hot streak in recruiting after landing Jalen Brown, the 5-star out of Miami, Florida. A 5-star who was trending towards Miami, and at the last minute, the experts have picked LSU, and now he is committed to LSU. How? How, you might ask? With LSU being so behind and Brian Kelly being not a good recruiter? Well, it goes back to what I've been saying all along. Relationships still matter. Jalen Brown was considering Notre Dame when Brian Kelly was still there. Matter of fact, many people have said that the lead recruiter for Jalen Brown at Notre Dame was Brian Kelly, not one of his assistant coaches. And Jalen Brown was also considering Georgia when Cortez Hankton was still there. They were in the lead at some point. Well, now both are at LSU, and that relationship grew even stronger. So, was NIL a factor? Well, of course, he's going to get an NIL deal. Of course he is. But the type of money Miami is throwing around with their big billionaire booster that they have, sure. But relationships still matter. And according to Sam Spiegelman of On3 Sports, he reported today on the Jordy Culotta show that academics are also a high priority for Jalen Brown, who's at a very prestigious prep school in Miami, and that the moniker that Brian Kelly has brought with him to LSU, Graduate Champions, pretty much sold him on LSU. It was the final nail in the coffin. Now, having said that, I'm beginning to wonder, how behind is LSU in NIL? I mean, really, how behind are they really on NIL? Now, I never believed it was as much as we were being told, because LSU's boosters, well, sure, they may be frustrated that, hey, we just paid all this money, weren't organized, trying to fire Ogeron, all that stuff. Sure, I believe that. But I also believe that many of the narratives surrounding LSU media, especially in the local media, many of them were probably or currently are just mouthpieces for LSU fundraisers and LSU boosters. I also know this because LSU has not lost a recruit in this cycle to NIL deals. Because Dante Moore, who just committed to Oregon today, the 5-star quarterback, Mike Scarborough of TigerBait.com, who's as plugged in as anyone when it comes to recruiting. He has sources with recruiting experts nationally, and he has been telling everybody for the past 2 months that LSU's NIL offer for Dante Moore were up to par and not behind, according to every other school that was recruiting him. LSU was right there with him with NIL deals. But that Dante Moore landed at Oregon over Michigan, LSU, Texas A&M, Notre Dame because of one thing and one thing only: early playing time. He wants to compete and play early as a freshman. All the other schools on that list, Michigan, LSU, A&M, Notre Dame, they all have young and loaded quarterback talent in their quarterback room. So I'll keep banging this drum. Yes, NIL is important, but that doesn't mean relationships and geography still aren't important. The two main things that have always been a top priority for recruiting for over 150 years. What I think is a bigger deal, though, right now, is that all the recruiting momentum Miami has, especially with NIL, that LSU still went into Miami, Florida, it stole their top wide receiver. I mean, this is what Brian Kelly was talking about when he came to LSU. To get wide receivers that can take the top off of defenses. That's really what Brian Kelly said in several interviews when he talked about losing those games to Alabama or losing those games to Clemson or Ohio State, was he always felt like we were a couple of skill players away from really competing with them. Well, Jalen Brown, when he runs, he looks like he's gliding on skates. Jalen Brown may be the fastest wide receiver in this year's class. Notre Dame, they never got top-end skill guys. And even now, with Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman going on a very impressive recruiting tear, they still aren't. All their top recruits are not skill guys. They're still on the line of scrimmage. And I will also tell you when it comes to LSU that they will get another 5-star. Shelton Sampson Jr., the number one wide receiver in the state of Louisiana, it's almost a foregone conclusion that he will commit to LSU. Okay? You can all laugh at me if I'm wrong. That's just what I'm telling you today. But there is another trend in college football that I don't think enough people are talking about. And this kind of plays into LSU's recent commit yesterday with Jeremiah Hughes, the cornerback from Las Vegas. It's the massive misevaluations of local prospects. So Jeremiah Hughes, he's a 3-star cornerback from Las Vegas. He's 6'1", 175, has a big SEC frame on him. He plays for a big-time school in Bishop Gorman, for those of you who don't know what that is. So he's being recognized, but he's only rated as a 3-star. Part of that is because he just started playing cornerback recently. Before that, he was a wide receiver his whole life. And it is being predicted by many in the recruiting sites that he will make a huge jump in the rankings his senior season. But it's not just Hughes we're talking about. It's a larger sense of local recruiting. Because of the pandemic, because of the internet world we live in, and because of this thing called homogenization, which is the new buzzword now, where basically it's one business engulfing a bunch of other businesses to make the business even stronger, kind of like what we're seeing with all the conferences in college football engulfing each other. Well, that's happened in the recruiting site, website world as well. And because of this, a lot of sites have less local recruiting scouts, and more national recruiting scouts. And the ones that are local, a lot of them don't go out and watch high school games and high school camps like they used to because the pandemic has made them say, wait a minute, I can just stay home and watch the highlights on the computer. That's why LSU offered Ashton Stamps, the 3-star defensive back out of Rummel in New Orleans. He's the 700th ranked player in the nation. But when you ask all the high school football people in that area, and many of them have said that Ashton Stamps is the most underrated player in the city of New Orleans for the 2023 cycle. Same thing with Arch Manning. All the national sites have him unanimously, and I mean unanimously, number one overall player. But yet all of the local Louisiana scouts and high school coaches say he's not even the best quarterback in the state the last 2 years. So a lot's going to be changing now with high school rankings. Now, there's also a difference that you'll see in recruiting with Brian Kelly and Ed Ogeron, and you've kind of seen it already. Ed Ogeron would star chase Louisiana recruits. In other words, he would just look at star rankings, and he was so obsessed with perception and people judging him for not going hard enough at this player in the state of Louisiana because they were highly ranked on this recruiting website. He was worried about the perception of things. Guys who he knew were not good enough to play in the SEC. You can probably name a few of them. Brian Kelly is different. Brian Kelly doesn't give a shit about what you think of him, which is part of the reason why he's been so successful everywhere he's been. Y'all, there's a reason why the second-rated wide receiver in the state of Louisiana, Omarion Miller, committed to Nebraska. Not just because of Mickey Joseph, again, relationships, but he showed up to LSU's camp and he got his ass kicked. And that's not the first time where a top-ranked Louisiana recruit or top 15 Louisiana recruit goes to an LSU camp and doesn't perform very well. But in this case, Brian Kelly's like, no, you're not a top priority anymore. LSU still recruited him, but they were like, we're looking elsewhere as well. So as a result, he's going to Nebraska. And if he was such a top priority, if he was such a great player, then let me ask you this. Why wasn't he getting recruited harder by other SEC schools? See what I mean? Look, I'm no local scout. I'm no expert on scouting. The show's called Out of My League. But I watched film the other day on Omarion Miller, who's a 4-star, number 2 ranked wide receiver in the state of Louisiana. Then I went and watched the 3-star wide receiver. LSU just got out of Texas a couple of weeks ago, Kyle Parker. And it took me less than 2 minutes to see who was the better wide receiver, and it wasn't even close. All right? Even if you're not an expert, but you've watched football your whole life like I can, you can see it. So going forward, star rankings still matter, but beware. Don't get upset every time LSU offers or gets a commitment from a 3-star, because there's usually a good reason why. Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.